Climate finance is needed now more than ever. The importance in dealing with the impacts of a changing climate cannot be overstated. It is estimated that developing countries require $387 billion a year to adapt to our changing climate, but what's available is far below this. Internationally, adaptation finance is channeled from governments through multilateral and bilateral mechanisms, but there are deficits and challenges in recipient countries like poor economic growth, competing demands, high unemployment and high inflation that reduce the impact of the climate finance they receive. There are solutions, like dramatically scaling international support for adaptation, reducing funding shortfalls, and simplifying processes to get hold of this money. Contributor countries should also support in improving the economic capacity of developing countries, particularly the financial sector. And policy approaches in recipient countries that integrate adaptation into wider development priorities should be encouraged. If climate finance is to meet the adaptation needs of developing countries, it requires an agreed understanding on what activities count so adaptation finance is well spent. The international climate regime has acknowledged the dire need to enhance access to climate finance, and funding channels accountable to the UNFCCC have embedded this concept into their operations. But the issue is made more complex because these are not the only channels used to deliver climate finance. Complicated and fragmented processes to access adaptation finance cause high transaction costs and make it difficult for recipient countries to put the money to use for their own development goals. Identifying each channel and creating an aligned set of terminology around access to finance is key. Mandating the involvement of local or subnational financial institutions for programming adaptation finance, as well as transparency and learning from provided finance, could also ensure that genuinely accessible adaptation finance is flowing to where it's needed the most. Instead of allowing affected communities to make decisions on how best to use this finance, decisions tend to be top-down. They are often seen as beneficiary stakeholders rather than decision-making stakeholders. In rural India, village assemblies or Gram Sabhas are enshrined in the constitution. These forums allow communities to discuss local adaptation needs and development issues. They offer a vital platform for bottom-up decision-making. These are low-cost, institutionally established processes that climate finance providers must engage with if we are to depart from the typical top-down, detached nature of climate finance provision and mobilization. There are barriers to implementing a bottom-up approach, but they can be overcome by building adaptation action into local development, enhancing access to information, and leveling the playing field for women and men to ensure maximum adaptation investment in local communities. Trust has been damaged by past climate finance failures. Despite being less than what was needed, it was agreed that $100 billion each year in climate finance would flow from developed to developing countries, starting in 2020. But this goal wasn't reached until 2022. Climate finance goals must be needs-based, and developing countries must be heard in negotiations. The need for more and better targeted public finance for adaptation must be recognized in climate finance targets. Crucially, there must be consensus on effort sharing. The collective nature of climate finance targets often shields individual countries from responsibility and accountability. The new climate finance goals should learn from past mistakes and keep the vulnerable at its heart, who will continue to be the worst affected by delay and inaction of those that hold the money.